And we're meeting today just about a year after Osama bin Laden's demise, a time when some have suggested that al-Qaeda itself is on life support or even dead. Others would say that's a delusion, and that even if it's true, it misses the more important point. The more important point being that the ideas and the ideology that motivate al-Qaeda also motivate many others who have different strategies, but more or less the same goals and ambitions. So I've asked Ambassador Haqqani to address us this morning for this afternoon rather, for a few minutes, and to share with us his perspectives on this and other issues. And then I'll pose some questions, joined by my two colleagues, Bill and Reuel. And then we'll get to you, our distinguished audience, to join in the conversation. Now, as many of you also know, Bill Roggio is a senior fellow at FDD and is the editor of the Long War Journal, which has become must-reading for those in government and the intelligence community and the military, and especially those who follow Afghanistan and Pakistan. Reuel Marc Gerecht is also a senior fellow at FDD. He's a former intelligence officer at the CIA's Directorate of Operations. I note that this session is on the record, except where our speakers may ask otherwise, and they should feel free to do so. And finally, may I ask you to turn off your cell phones or anything else that goes bump or buzz in the night. And with that, I'll turn this over to Ambassador Haqqani. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cliff. Before I address our topic of this afternoon, I would like to thank you, FDD, Nina Shea, who's in the audience, and many others here who were very concerned about my well-being during the last few months, especially those months that I spent in Pakistan after resigning from my position as Ambassador of Pakistan to the United States. As some of you may recall, those were rather difficult times for me, and the support that I got from those who are concerned about democracy and freedom around the world was something that was heartening during those days. And when I did get my freedom, it was important for me to acknowledge the contribution of everybody. But it also tells us how the solidarity amongst all of us actually is helpful. People think, how do we change things around the world? Very frankly, globalization has its disadvantages, but one of its advantages is that even those who say that they don't like globalization and want to live in isolation are affected by what others say. So the judges in Pakistan who basically wanted to restrict my freedom of movement without actually formally charging me with anything definitely were swayed by what some of you wrote and said in this capital and many others, and for that I'm grateful. Let's come to the subject of al-Qaeda and whether it's dead or not. Before we talk about whether al-Qaeda is dead, let's address the question of should we treat al-Qaeda just as an organization, the organization whose members were listed in one of the computers found at bin Laden's final residence, or is al-Qaeda something bigger than that? And I recall that many years ago, as a scholar at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, I had actually reviewed a book called The Virtues of Jihad, which since has ended up on the internet in English, the book as well as the review. And in that review, I had pointed out that in some ways, today's al-Qaeda, and subsequently Professor Aisha Jalal of Tufts University actually studied that whole movement that I referred to, that in the 19th century, there was a movement in South Asia which actually was located in India, but moved to what is today the northwest frontier region of Pakistan, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province as we call it, the tribal areas, FATA, as you all read about it, and Afghanistan, because they thought that was going to be the base for a much wider jihad. And that was the model of al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda literally means the base. What is it the base of? It's the base of global jihad. And Americans, of course, except a few people perhaps in the intelligence community, etc., didn't deal with it much until 9/11. But after 9/11, there was a lot of what can best be called quackery or quackery-oriented expertise that immediately cropped up after 9/11, because it was the topic du jour in this country, of course. We all admire and are very fond of capitalism. But the downside of capitalism is that whatever sells is produced. And so some of it is not always very good quality. So a lot of stuff was generated all of a sudden and will probably be generated from a discussion of the pornography found on bin Laden's computers to everything else. But fundamentally, let's understand al-Qaeda and its concept. The concept was that here is a region that is ripe to base the jihad in. That's why bin Laden eventually moved to Afghanistan when he couldn't remain in Sudan. He needed a base. And the war against the Soviets had enabled all these people to come together to get trained, at that time by the best. Except that now they believe that the second stage has arrived, and that is to fight the second superpower. The Soviet Union has collapsed. Now we will fight against the United States. So if al-Qaeda is the base, then the base alone is not the enemy. Basically, what it is the base of is the enemy. Every other group and network that al-Qaeda has spawned is the enemy for those who want to eliminate global networks of terrorism. And that is something that gets lost partly because America does not have generally a desire for long wars. It's never liked it. And this is going to be a long war. That was something that people should have known from day one, because it involves a war against a few people that attacked you on 9/11, but it also involves elimination of all those who are connected to it and who believe that terrorism is the way forward. And lastly, those who actually help the recruitment for these causes. So all those who think, and by the way, some of the grievances are not totally unfounded. I mean, there are grievances. We must admit to them. There's no point in denying the grievances that enable groups like al-Qaeda to recruit and all its network groups. But then the question is, should we reconcile ourselves to having to sort of deal with this problem of terrorism forever and ever without actually questioning those who recruit people because we can't deal with the grievances? Or should we wait to deal with the problem until the grievances are resolved? I think both arguments are flawed. We can't wait to deal with terrorists who are an immediate or imminent threat till all grievances that help people get recruited for terrorism are resolved. That can't happen. But similarly, we can't ignore the grievances completely and say, well, we will only battle the consequence and not deal with the grievances as well. So all of these things, we can all chew gum and walk straight at the same time, or at least most of us think we can, and we should. I think that the demise of al-Qaeda is being touted a little prematurely. I think that those people who were part of the base, the primarily Arab groups that came together, the individuals who came together, who fought in the war against the Soviets, and after fighting in the war against the Soviets, developed this whole matrix of trying to do sensational attacks to get attention for their worldview, and attack primarily the United States. Those few hundred people have definitely been decimated considerably, and the few that are left are going to be hopefully eliminated in the days to come. But they are not the end of al-Qaeda. They have spawned several other groups. For example, there was a time there was no al-Qaeda in Iraq, and then an al-Qaeda did arise in Iraq, as we all know, with Zarqawi. Similarly, now Yemen is becoming the focal point as they've realized that they've been under pressure in the Afghanistan-Pakistan area. Then the Yemen front is becoming more active. More important than that, the way Afghanistan and Pakistan turn out is going to be crucial to the future of al-Qaeda for one very simple reason. I have a question for people to ponder. As a Pakistani, I have myself proudly pointed out that most of al-Qaeda's senior leaders who were arrested and have ended up in Guantanamo Bay were arrested in Pakistan. It's something that Pakistanis take pride in, that we helped in arresting these. But there's a second part of the question, which is, why the heck were they there? Why did they choose to be there? Now, one answer is, because Pakistan is the natural geographic location for them to move from Afghanistan. True. But how does that explain say for example bin Laden coming in from Afghanistan and then moving in 6-7 different cities, or for example Khalid Sheikh Mohammed being able to move between Quetta, Karachi and Rawalpindi and being arrested eventually in Rawalpindi, or Ahmad Khalfan al-Gilani being found in Gujarat, I think it was, Abu Zubaydah being found in the city of Faisalabad. They certainly ended up there because they had a network of supporters and friends and people who sympathized with their ideals. And so, as a Pakistani, let me just say, and I wrote about it a few days ago in the New York Times, my greatest concern about Pakistan is the state of denial, not just on the part of the government or the military or the intelligence services. I'm not blaming anybody in particular, but a state of denial as a society, because most of us in Pakistan still do not deem the al-Qaeda threat and the terrorist threat serious enough for all of us to see that this is a threat that will consume our country. More Pakistanis have died as a result of attacks by al-Qaeda and its linked groups. And when I say linked groups, even those that are loosely linked, there are many. There are many of them that are loosely linked. And then there are the Pakistani groups. So, for example, if al-Qaeda's primary targets would be Americans of Jewish heritage in particular, would be like at the top. There's a hierarchy of attacks. But then there are Pakistani groups for whom the attack targets are Shias or Ahmadis or Pakistani Christians. What are they trying to do? They're basically trying to pursue the creation of some kind of a supra-ideal, and for that they are willing to use terrorism. They are far from dead, and the idea is far from dead. I think those are my opening remarks. I'll stop here. I'm sure my colleagues at the up here have questions, and I'm sure you guys have lots of questions too, and I'm sure you have answers as well, Bill and Reuel. Thank you very much.
I'm going to start with this, and then I'll let my colleagues either question or comment as they please. But I guess I'm asking you to elaborate on the point you've made just now. But what strikes me is that A.Q. Khan was a nuclear proliferator, perhaps the worst the world has ever known. In Pakistan, to a great extent, he is a hero. Dr. Afridi helped Americans find and kill bin Laden, the world's leading terrorist. He's going to jail in Pakistan. This makes it difficult for people like myself and probably people like you to say Pakistan is an American ally and should be viewed that way.
Well, let me just say that as Richard Holbrooke finally adopted what I used to say to him whenever we had conversations when he was dealing with Afghanistan and Pakistan, most of our conversations began with me saying, Richard, it's complicated. So Richard then adopted that as his little sort of moniker for talking about Pakistan, and he did that on many television interviews, etc. He would always say it's complicated. But I think the biggest complication is the rise of a very twisted version of Pakistani nationalism in Pakistan. Unfortunately, it's now whether it's the majority, minority, that's a different subject. In elections, for example, the political parties that emerged victorious in the last election do not subscribe officially to that worldview. But there is a worldview being propagated in Pakistan. Turn on Pakistani television news channels. I mean, the day after bin Laden was found, their concern was, how did the Americans find bin Laden? I'm concerned about that too, by the way, that the Americans acted unilaterally. They should not have. It would have been better if they had acted together with Pakistan. They had their own reasons for acting unilaterally, the same concerns that you have. But my question is, at least the debate should have been 50-50. Half of the concern should have been, why was bin Laden in our country? And half the concern should have been, why was there a unilateral strike to get him? Instead of that, it was all about sovereignty, sovereignty, sovereignty alone. Now, most nations do go by whatever is the concern, the primary concern as defined for them by their nation's leaders, whether they are political leaders, religious leaders. In this country, what people hear in their churches, etc., defines some of their beliefs and views, what they read in the newspapers, what they see on television. So the discourse in Pakistan, I'm still not willing to say that people in the government of Pakistan, in our military, in our intelligence service, do not understand the value of the alliance with the United States. They do. But because soldiers, intelligence officials, law enforcement personnel, government, politicians particularly, they're all affected by what is the national discourse. And the national discourse in Pakistan is more anti-American than it's anti-al-Qaeda. Let's be real. And there is a long history of getting into arguments about, oh, but you see, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, etc., etc. And there is a total unwillingness to face issues like, A.Q. Khan may have done good from the Pakistani point of view, nationalist point of view, in helping Pakistan acquire nuclear technology faster than it would have been able to do with all the global sanctions. But that doesn't give him license to proliferate nuclear technology and sell it. So even from Pakistani point of view, supposing getting nuclear weapons was a Pakistani national objective, even then, he has violated Pakistani and international law. But because of the way he has positioned himself, and his Aman corner in Pakistan has positioned him for the nation, you can't critique him, you can't criticize him, you can't question him. He is somehow above criticism and question. Come to Dr. Afridi. Look, most people would agree that cooperating with a foreign intelligence service behind the back of your own law enforcement, etc., may be a violation of law. But is it treason? Did he actually commit treason because he didn't spy on Pakistan, etc.? And then if all of that is true, why was he not given a fair trial? Because whatever the crime he committed allegedly took place in Abbottabad, which is part of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. So he should be subject either to provincial law or to federal law. Instead, because he was born in the tribal areas, he was taken back to the tribal areas and tried under a different legal system in the tribal area, which hastened the process of prosecution. That hasn't been done for others. For example, the Daniel Pearl case is still hanging fire. And that's where I criticize Pakistan's judges, who also are ideologically motivated. So in case of Pakistan, yes, I can understand why you and many other Americans are having great difficulty in understanding whether Pakistan should continue to be treated as an ally. But you have to understand that it's not just about government policy anymore. It's about how the overall national mood has been shaped and is being shaped. One of my colleagues whom I was talking to earlier, who's also from Pakistan, was saying to me, but why don't the Americans understand how to do the right things to change all of that and all that? And my answer to him was simple, that the Americans should not be expected to resolve Pakistan's own internal psychoses. But that is the expectation of America's friends in Pakistan, that you will deal with Pakistan in a manner in which it enables them to deal with the problem. And since that's not happening, I think the two countries are continuing to drift apart. And the more they drift apart, I think that the harder line views inside Pakistan will strengthen rather than get weakened.
I'm going to one more question before I pass the mic, because it follows up, and because I have the privilege to do so, and that is, Pakistan was created as a homeland for Indian Muslims by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who saw the country as a tolerant country, as a largely secular country, as a free and democratic country. I started visiting Pakistan more than 25 years ago, greeted by high officials at that time. I've seen it change a lot from the time of Zia al-Haq, who was very friendly to us, but I changed the direction of the country. Is there an inevitability to the evolution that Pakistan has taken away from tolerance and democracy, away from respect for its minorities, most of whom have left, and those who are still there do not live in freedom and equality, towards what I think it's fair to call increasing Islamism?
Cliff, there is never any inevitability towards fascism. I don't believe in this, and I'm not a Marxist, and so therefore I don't believe in historical determinism. I think a society can change. I think there are forces in Pakistan, there are people in Pakistan, there are individuals in Pakistan who take a strong stand, and many of them are willing to pay a price for it, within the country and outside. And those of us who are now part of the diaspora, we have strong voices, and we can affect that as well. But the important thing is that the battle is not over. It is not going in our favor. That's true. There are more resources at the disposal of the hardliners. Maybe they have better strategies. I don't know. Maybe they have a simplified message. But we see also another problem, and I will say that without changing the topic away from Pakistan, but we see something similar happening in Egypt, for example. I mean, the Muslim Brotherhood is significant, etc., etc. But when push came to shove, they got only a quarter of the vote for their presidential candidate. He couldn't win an outright victory. The only problem, of course, is that the other sides of how you want to build a liberal, democratic, pluralist, tolerant Pakistan has 97 different answers. How you want to do an Islamist state is primarily not really an answer, but one slogan. And so it's much easier for example, when the Muslim Brotherhood stands up and says, Islam, that's the solution, they can get 25% of the people, 75% say we want a solution, but this is like too abstract, Islam being the solution. What are the solutions? Well, you have different voices. And so that is another problem in Pakistan. But the debate also, unfortunately, gets messed up by those who do not allow the debate. Pakistan does not have censorship per se. We have a very free and open and diverse media, as you found out when you went there. But it is, in a way, manipulated, because it's much easier to call somebody a kafir, which means unbeliever, or a traitor, which is being done a lot, which is simple, but it's much more complex to explain. And then our curricular reform is just absolutely necessary. Some of us have worked on it. Pakistan school textbooks. I mean, but then the result of curriculum reform is going to be in another generation, because here's a whole generation, and Pakistan's population is almost half of it is below the age of 21. So there's a whole generation that has grown up on cliches that are being taught in school, which are very difficult to change. It's like, think about the United States, even with the best of will here, if racism was actually institutionalized in school curriculum, how would you change it from the top? Because a lot of people would just think of it as normal. So there's a lot of stuff that is normal to people because of the way they've been taught in school. And that is a very serious problem and needs a long-term solution. My view is that Pakistan needs a longer-term solution, but Americans do not have the patience for long-term solutions. So therefore, Americans will have to have some kind of a short-term solution for the problem of al-Qaeda and terrorism. And that is something that your country is right now trying to debate. And I don't know what the outcome of that debate is going to be. It's certainly not going to be very positive towards Pakistan.
Reuel, want to join in the conversation?
I think Bill's going to be meaner than I'm going to be, so it might be best if he goes for the next, actually.
All right. All right. Oh, Bill recognizes.
I can take mean rule.
Yeah. He loves it.
I come from Pakistan.
I say throw. Yeah, well, and Bill understands the concept of a long war, obviously.
Yeah. No, I actually agree with Ambassador Haqqani in the sense that the United States isn't prepared to fight a long war, and we are looking for quick solutions. We're looking for the defeat of al-Qaeda, but we don't have an overarching strategy to deal with the root causes of terrorism. And that is that al-Qaeda and allied groups have a very powerful ideology that, and they operate with either the approval of states or the ignorance of states, or by states not addressing the issue. You know, when I look at things like...
Push that mic down a little bit more towards your mouth.
Absolutely. Sorry about that. With Pakistan, you know, we look at A.Q. Khan and we act like A.Q. Khan here was some kind of independent actor that was operating outside of the approval of the Pakistani government. Was he ordering airplanes to fly to Iran and North Korea? I mean, was he doing all of these things on his own as an individual actor? No, he was operating at the approval of the Pakistani state. And, you know, so I think that this gives us more reason to have very real concerns as to why someone like A.Q. Khan is a hero and why A.Q. Khan can walk free, and yet the man, Dr. Afridi, who helped us kill bin Laden, is sitting in a jail. Mumbai. Look at the Mumbai attacks. Has anyone been prosecuted in Pakistan for the Mumbai terror attacks in 2008? No. There is Lashkar-e-Taiba operatives supposedly in prison. My guess is they're not. India and the United States have handed over evidence of Lashkar-e-Taiba's involvement, of Hafez Saeed's involvement in the Mumbai attacks, and Hafez Saeed meets Pakistani generals and politicians, and he's feted on TV. He's popular in Pakistan. These are very real concerns. When we look at Pakistani society, this isn't just some individuals pulling a couple of strings. I think we have a more systemic problem that is going to really harm our ability to work with that. I don't think we're working with Pakistan to fight al-Qaeda. Maybe individual elements. Pakistan itself doesn't like some of the hardcore al-Qaeda, but then again, Osama bin Laden lived in Pakistan since September 11th, since the 9/11 attacks, since the invasion of Afghanistan. And I just really have a difficult time believing that he did this without support of very powerful individuals in the Pakistani government. He lived a stone's throw from Pakistan's West Point, essentially Pakistan's West Point in Abbottabad. So, I'm going to go back to the initial question that was asked here: is al-Qaeda defeated? I think that the estimates of that this administration has been putting out that al-Qaeda is defeated in Afghanistan and Pakistan, that we've been told for 3 years now there's only 50 to 100 al-Qaeda operatives in Afghanistan, 300 to 400 al-Qaeda operatives in Pakistan. That number hasn't changed. It's a static estimate that's sat there. I hear officials say it time and time again, and when I ask questions about this, nobody has any answers. That's just the estimate. So where are they regenerating these guys from? Last year, ISAF, the International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan, at one point, they said they killed 40 al-Qaeda operatives in Afghanistan in a week, and yet that estimate stayed the same. How does this happen? Are they regenerating from Pakistan? Are they recruiting new members from allied terror groups? Al-Qaeda remains strong, particularly in Pakistan. We're conducting drone strikes in Pakistan. We're killing senior Al-Qaeda leaders. One Al-Qaeda leader, Bader Mansour, he's not supposedly Al-Qaeda's leader in Pakistan. He's mentioned in the bin Laden documents, by the way, bin Laden in late 2010 described him as one of Al-Qaeda's company commanders. You look at the numbers that this guy alone has, apparently is somewhere estimated around 2,200 fighters. So they call 300 to 400 hardcore fighters and 150 suicide bombers. These numbers don't add up, and Bader Mansour is someone who's closely allied to the Tehrik-e-Taliban in Pakistan, closely allied to the Harkat al-Mujahideen. These are terror groups that operate within Pakistan and that have operated in Pakistan for years. Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan is an enemy of the Pakistani state, not a doubt. Pakistani has launched military operations against them throughout the Northwest. But the Harkat al-Mujahideen operates in the open. Its leader, Khalil, has an apartment in Islamabad.
It's a very huge house.
Yes. House. Yes, a mansion. This is the problem that we face in Pakistan. Pakistan wants to focus in on these very hardcore individual al-Qaeda leaders who are a threat to the Pakistani state in the sense that if an attack is launched on the U.S., they're going to be held to account for it. But Pakistan doesn't want to deal with Lashkar-e-Taiba. They don't want to deal with Harkat al-Mujahideen. They don't want to deal with, the whole alphabet soup of Pakistani jihadist groups that are operating on their territory, because I still think that they're viewed as part of Pakistan's strategic depth against India, as well as its hedge in Afghanistan.
Reuel?
I basically have just a question. Let's suppose that the Americans withdraw their forces from Afghanistan by the end of 2014. Let's suppose that by the end of 2015, beginning of 2016, Kabul's control of the south of Afghanistan has fractured. They may not have lost all the cities. If you think of the Soviet occupation, the Afghan communists were able to hold the cities for quite some time, but let's just say that they've lost most of the south. And so the scent of victory or defeat, depending upon your perspective, is quite redolent in Pakistan. How do you see that possible, if not probable, victory of the Taliban, the Pashtun Islamists in Afghanistan affecting internal Pakistani politics? And is it conceivable, as some are beginning to suggest, that if Pakistan can return to its normal ways with the Taliban, that Islamic militancy in both Afghanistan and Pakistan will deglobalize, and that in fact it is the war there which helps to internationalize the militancy in the subcontinent, and that if the Pashtuns were just proved victorious, things would improve.
If I may, I think Bill made some very valid points. I think that Pakistan has to deal with Harkat al-Mujahideen, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Harkat al-Jihad al-Islami, and Lashkar-e-Taiba. We can't get away from it. I don't know how many of you have seen. They've posted it now. I think it's available on YouTube as well. The video that Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, the Pakistani Taliban, TTP, has put on the internet about the Banu jailbreak. They actually attacked the jail in Banu and released about 200 and some prisoners, including somebody who was under trial for trying to kill General Pervez Musharraf, who was not only president at that time, he was army chief. Now, anybody else, I mean, all Pakistani soldiers should be very worried about that. That's a very dangerous thing that they can do that. And apparently, Dr. Afridi is being moved from Peshawar to Islamabad on grounds that there might be an attempt to attack the Peshawar jail as well. Now, the Banu jail thing, the video actually is very, very telling, because they've deliberately shown meetings, preparatory meetings for the attack, to show that we have Arabs, we have Chechens, we have Pashtuns, and we have Punjabis, who are all part of the plan and of the movement. And that is a serious threat to Pakistan and should be treated as such. And why it's not being done worries me as a Pakistani and disturbs me as somebody who has been in Pakistani government, and annoys me because while I was in government, I was ringing those bells myself. Now, going back to the whole question of what Reuel has raised, what if the Taliban... Look, first of all, this time it's going to be quite different. I mean, if the US leaves and there is a civil war in Afghanistan, the non-Pashtuns and the non-jihadist Pashtuns are not going to be as weak as they were before, because in the past, the Northern Alliance it was not as well armed as, say, for example, Hekmatyar was. And when it came to strategic smarts, they had much more strategic smarts than these guys, because they survived. I mean, in the end also, they ended up in their little valley and they just ended up holding in there and staying there, and Masood remained alive. And in our part of the world, Reuel, as you well know, staying alive is important. And
actually, it's true in Bethesda too.
Yeah. and so this time, I think the Northern Alliance, which was supported by Russia, by India and Iran in the later part of the civil war in Afghanistan after the Taliban victory, they will have a better starting point. They will have the support from the beginning, which is again a cause for concern for me as a Pakistani. I don't want, for example, the whole notion of strategic depth has been, we don't want Afghanistan to be ruled by people who are too close to those who may want to encircle us, i.e. India, and now possibly Iran. So if India, Iran and Russia, and who they are supporting in the civil war, will have a much better starting point, then the people we are supporting have a lesser starting point, because they are narrower. I mean, the Haqqani network, for example, as you well know, is just limited to the 3 provinces of Paktia, Paktika and Khost. So they're not as strong and as big as the Taliban movement was when it started out. Similarly, Mullah Omar and his group's influence is going to be primarily in the 4 or 5 southern provinces. So I personally feel that it would only create prolonged civil war, from which again the Americans cannot remain totally dissociated this time. Last time they weren't particularly involved on a day-to-day basis. This time they will be. And then the Central Asian republics will probably be a little more worried because they do not want an Islamist state in Afghanistan. That's one of the reasons why in the past they supported the Northern Alliance. None of which is good for Pakistan, which is why I would rather that we took it upon ourselves to deal with this problem. And much is said about, there's need for negotiations with the Taliban, etc. If the Taliban are willing to negotiate, fine. But my definition of negotiation is not, I want you to do this, and if you don't do this, I'll fight you. I mean, negotiation is something that is finding some middle ground. We haven't seen that happening. So what I see is Americans losing interest and saying, okay, basically sort of fighting battles by clock. We've been there 10 years, that's long enough, and you haven't won, so we might as well fight it or decide that it's not important enough and leave, in which case be prepared for the consequences. You're doing neither. Pakistan will have problems either way. Our biggest problem is going to be a Taliban victory in Afghanistan will not only affect the Pashtuns, no longer just the Pashtun areas. It will affect the non-Pashtun areas as well. Because the TTP, with support from Afghanistan or a Taliban base in Afghanistan, will have an effect inside Pakistan. Look at 28th of May, that's yesterday, was the anniversary of the Ahmadi massacre of Lahore, when 70 Ahmadis, and Ahmadis are a Muslim sect that a lot of Muslims deem to be not Muslim, which is known to all religions. There's always somebody or the other that people say is outside the pale of the mainstream religion. Who are we to decide? And the Ahmadis, their mosque in which people went in and killed 70 people, all of whom were ethnic Punjabis. Both the killers and the killed. So I think to think that this is just going to be a Pashtun problem is again being very narrow. I think that some of these groups now are... Look, al-Qaeda was meant as a pan-Islamist group, but with Arab roots. And the al-Qaeda spin-offs also have ethnic bases because that's the way of recruitment, family, networks, etc., etc. But some of these groups are going to remain a problem for Pakistan long after the Americans are gone, and that's been my position. People misunderstand. My position is not America come hell or high water, we have to support America or etc. No, my position as a Pakistani who cares about Pakistan has been that Pakistan's own future depends upon defeating terrorism, because I do not want a Pakistan in which young female children cannot go to school, which is what the Taliban want. But the Taliban, as we know it, wherever they have spheres of influence in Pakistan, they are adversely affecting Pakistani society. So if the Taliban have some kind of success in Afghanistan, there will be very adverse consequences for Pakistan.
But do you see any chance that the Pakistani military could resist the strong historical temptation and religious?
I'm not going to comment on the military support for the Taliban right now. That's something that, it's too soon after Ambassador to start getting into all of that sort of purely scholarly stuff. Let me just say, support in Pakistan for the Taliban, those who support the Taliban and whoever it is, they have had it wrong from the beginning. The Taliban provide no depth to Pakistan. They provide no security to Pakistan. They are a bunch of yahoos who do not understand the modern world. They are enemies of modernity. They are enemies of the world as we know it. These are guys who are now making videos under the influence of al-Qaeda, by the way. But if you remember, they were the ones who used to go around destroying televisions at one point. And so they are not good news for Pakistan, period. And all the things about, well, they are part of the society, etc., etc., yeah, but they should not all societies have such elements. I have no problems with. I mean, a lot of Americans don't have any problems with the Amish, for example. But if the Amish were going to try and proselytize and take over your country, I'm sure a lot of you would forget religious and doctrinal differences to make sure that you remain in the 21st century. And that's what Pakistan needs to do. And if it's not being done, and whoever it's not being done by, including the Pakistani military, is a disaster for Pakistan.
Can I make one quick comment?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, and then I'll.
Afghanistan. One of the things I think we're going to see when the U.S. Does finally leave Afghanistan is that civil war. But what we're seeing in Afghanistan now is that the Haqqani network doesn't just operate in those three little provinces. They've expanded their influence to the capital, up in the north. Their operations have expanded. Even a group like the Mullah Dadullah Front, which is led by Mullah Zakir, who is a Gitmo detainee. He traditionally operates in southern Afghanistan. His group had conducted an assassination in Kabul, someplace where he traditionally doesn't operate. We're starting to see Islamic movement in Uzbekistan, which was traditionally operating up in northern Afghanistan, starting to operate in the east and southeast, and even in Kabul as well. We're starting to see these groups metastasize and work together. And the Islamic movement in Uzbekistan has basically integrated its leadership with the Taliban in the Afghan north. One of al-Qaeda's propaganda, since it took a beating in Iraq, was that they made the Khorasan, which is an empire, an old empire, Islamic empire, and basically in Central Asia and South Asia. They said that this is where we're going to beat them, and once we win in the Khorasan, we're going to move towards the Levant. So this has become a key part of al-Qaeda's propaganda. What do we think is going to happen when we lose in Afghanistan, when the second superpower loses? That is going to be a huge recruiting boon for foreign terrorists to operate in Afghanistan. And I think this is something that everyone is overlooking as we're running for the doors in Afghanistan.
You know, there are days when I think I should have stayed in the sort of, scholarship business and written some of that stuff that I was writing at that time. This was one of the things, even before Iraq, I had pointed out. For example, bin Laden had given a statement at that time about Americans being the new Mongols. And nobody could understand what he was talking about. And I said he's talking about the 1258 conquest of Baghdad. And he's playing on Islamic history and Islamic mythology, And so Khorasan was an important element in that also, because if you remember, the Abbasides, they rose to power through Khorasan, because that was an important element. They overthrew the Umayyads based on the argument that there is a hadith, which in my opinion is of relatively weak significance, but I'm taking off my hat of a theologian since I never completed my religious training. But anyway, they use that there is a hadith that the people from Khorasan will come and save the people of the Levant or whatever. And so that was used, and that was used again. And that has been part of the al-Qaeda thing. And then the other part is this famous Ghazwa-e-Hind, which is the Pakistani groups use it. Ghazwa is actually just as jihad is the war, a holy war or war for religious purposes. Ghazwa is a battle. And there's ostensibly his saying of Prophet Muhammad that that before the end times, the final biggest war between good and evil and between Islam and Kufr is going to take place in Hind, which is India, which is the land east of the river Indus. So Khorasan, takes care of what is today Afghanistan and some parts of Central Asia, and all of that it means a lot to people who believe in it. These end-time prophecies, etc. And so one of the unwritten books has been my desire to write. I wrote a piece on it once, an article, I think, which said that, Americans pay a lot of attention to their own end-time prophecies, but getting into that whole theater, they have totally neglected this. And so as far as recruitment is concerned, I'm totally agreeing with you that failure in Afghanistan is going to be a big boon for both the TTP, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, and the Pakistani groups are going to start saying, right, now is the time to start recruiting and fighting in that famous Ghazwa-e-Hind. Let's get ready for that. And the Arab groups are going to say, salvation is coming by joining up with the folks who are fighting in Khorasan. And both those fronts are going to be a source of a lot of problems.